Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back. Ashley said it so calmly that for a moment I thought I had misheard her. The dining room was still set the way I had left it after Robert's memorial service 3 days ago, the good china stacked neatly on the sideboard, the white lilies beginning to wilt in their crystal vase. My son Daniel sat across from me at the table, his hands folded, his eyes fixed on the wood grain like he was studying a blueprint instead of listening to his wife erase his mother from her own home. I waited for him to laugh, to say Ashley had gone too far, to remind her that this house on Maple Ridge Drive had been mine for 37 years. Instead, he cleared his throat and said quietly, "It's probably for the best, Mom. You shouldn't be here alone." Alone. The word echoed in my ears louder than Ashley's sentence. I had buried my husband of 42 years on a gray Tuesday morning, standing beside a polished oak casket while the pastor spoke about devotion and legacy. I had shaken hands, accepted casseroles, and thanked neighbors for coming. I had slept on only half of our king-size bed since the night Robert's heart simply gave out in his sleep. And now, 3 days later, I was being told to pack a suitcase. I folded my napkin with steady fingers and placed it beside my plate. "I see," I said. My voice did not tremble. That seemed to disappoint Ashley more than tears would have. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Daniel and I have been talking. The house was in Robert's name. It makes sense for us to take over. We can renovate. Start fresh. Renovate. Start fresh." As if my life here were an outdated carpet that needed replacing. I looked at the walls lined with framed photographs, Daniel at 8 years old holding a Little League trophy, Daniel at 18 in a cap and gown, Daniel on his wedding day standing beside the same woman now instructing me to leave. I remembered the summer Robert and I painted this dining room ourselves, arguing about shades of beige and laughing when we splattered paint on the baseboards. We had built this place paycheck by paycheck, month by month, 30-year mortgage payments mailed. With careful precision. "You can take your time," Ashley added, though her tone suggested the opposite. "A week should be enough." Daniel nodded, still not looking at me. I felt something inside my chest settle into place, not breaking, not cracking, just settling. Grief had been heavy and shapeless these past few days, like walking through water. But this was different. This was sharp. Clear. I pushed back my chair and stood up. My knees ached, a reminder that I was 72, not 32. "I'll go upstairs," I said. No one offered to help me. The staircase creaked the way it always had, each step familiar under my feet. Our bedroom door was half open. The bed was still made on Robert's side, his reading glasses resting on the nightstand beside the novel he would never finish. I sat on the edge of the mattress and allowed myself exactly one deep breath. Ashley's words replayed in my mind, but so did Robert's voice from years ago when we signed the final refinancing papers. "You'll never have to depend on anyone," he had told me, squeezing my hand in the lawyer's office. I glanced toward the small safe tucked inside the closet behind a row of winter coats. We had installed it after Daniel went to college, mostly for important documents and a few pieces of jewelry. I had not opened it since before the funeral. Downstairs, I could hear Ashley's voice drifting upward, light and practical. "We'll call the realtor next week," she said. "Once she's settled somewhere else." Somewhere else. As if I were a guest who had overstayed a holiday visit. I stood and walked to the closet, brushing my fingers along Robert's navy blazer hanging neatly on its wooden hanger. The scent of his cologne still lingered faintly in the fabric. "Grieve," Ashley had said, as though grief were a chore to complete before clearing out a storage unit. I knelt and entered the combination into the safe, the numbers as familiar as my own birthday. The lock clicked open with a soft metallic sound. Inside were neatly stacked folders, insurance policies, the deed copy, and an envelope with my name written in Robert's careful handwriting, Margaret. My hands hovered over it but did not open it yet. Not tonight. I closed the safe and stood back up, smoothing my skirt. In the hallway mirror, I caught sight of myself, silver hair pulled back, pearls at my throat, posture straight. I did not look like someone who was about to be discarded. I walked back downstairs. Daniel looked up briefly. "Mom?" he asked, as if unsure whether to offer comfort or instruction. "I'll need a few days," I said calmly. Ashley opened her mouth, ready to negotiate, but I raised a hand just slightly. "A few days," I repeated. My voice carried no anger, no pleading. Just certainty. Daniel nodded quickly. "That's fair." Ashley forced a thin smile. "Of course." I returned to the dining room table and began clearing the plates, one by one. The clink of porcelain against porcelain sounded louder than usual in the quiet house. No one stopped me. No one offered to help. As I carried the dishes into the kitchen, I noticed the late afternoon sun slanting through the window above the sink, illuminating dust particles in the air. Everything looked ordinary. Peaceful, even. And yet, in the span of a single sentence, my position in this family had shifted from matriarch to inconvenience. I rinsed a plate under warm water, watching the remnants of dinner swirl down the drain. Upstairs, behind winter coats and old tax returns, an envelope waited with my name on it. Ashley thought she had already won. Daniel believed this house was something he was about to inherit. They both assumed that grief had made me weak. They were wrong. I dried my hands carefully on a linen towel and turned off the faucet. The house was quiet again. And for the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt something stronger than sorrow settling in my chest. Not anger. Not revenge. Something steadier. Resolve. The next morning the house felt unfamiliar in a way that grief alone could not explain. The sun rose over Maple Ridge Drive exactly as it had for decades, washing the front lawn in pale gold light, but something in the air had shifted. I woke before 6 as I always had, my body still tuned to the rhythm Robert and I kept for years. For a moment I reached across the bed out of habit and felt only cool sheets. Then I remembered everything at once, the memorial, the lilies, Ashley's voice at the dining room table. I lay still and listened. Down the hall I could hear the low hum of the coffee maker. Ashley was already awake. She had never been an early riser before Robert passed. I wondered if she slept well knowing she had asked a 72-year-old widow to vacate her own home. I rose slowly and slipped on my robe. The hallway carpet muffled my steps as I made my way toward the kitchen. Ashley stood at the counter scrolling through her phone, dressed in workout leggings and a fitted jacket as if she were heading to a yoga class instead of reorganizing my life. Daniel sat at the island with a mug in his hands, staring at the steam rising from it. He looked tired. Older than he had a week ago. "Good morning," I said evenly. Ashley glanced up with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "Morning, Margaret. We were just talking about logistics." Logistics. As if I were a shipment that needed tracking. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, I started looking at some senior communities nearby. There is one about 15 miles out with nice amenities. Walking trails. A clubhouse." I poured myself a cup of coffee and added exactly 1 teaspoon of sugar, the way Robert used to tease me about. "That is thoughtful," I replied. I did not ask for brochures. I did not ask about square footage or monthly fees. I took my mug to the breakfast nook by the window and looked out at the oak tree Robert planted the year Daniel left for college. It had been barely 6 feet tall then. Now its branches stretched wide over the yard, solid and rooted. "You cannot stay here alone forever," Ashley continued gently. "This house is over 3,000 square feet. It is too much to manage." I let the number hang in the air. 3,000 square feet. I had vacuumed every inch of it. I had hosted Thanksgiving dinners for 22 people in this space. I had painted, repaired, landscaped, and polished until my hands ached. "I have managed it for 37 years, I said quietly. Daniel shifted in his seat. "Mom, we are just trying to help." "Help." I studied my son's face. The same brown eyes Robert had. The same crease between his brows when he felt conflicted. He did not look cruel. He looked convinced. Convinced that removing me was reasonable. Practical. Ashley's phone buzzed and she glanced at it. The realtor can come by next Wednesday to take pictures, she said casually. We should declutter before then. I sipped my coffee and felt its warmth steady me. Next Wednesday is in 5 days, I observed. Ashley nodded. That is why we should start packing today. I set my mug down carefully on its saucer. The faint clink seemed louder than it should have been. I asked for a few days, I reminded her. My tone did not rise. It did not need to. Daniel looked between us. Let us not rush, he said quickly, though he did not retract what had already been arranged. I finished my coffee and carried the cup to the sink. As I rinsed it, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. My shoulders were straight. My hands were steady. I was not frail. I was not confused. I was not finished. After breakfast I returned upstairs and closed the bedroom door. The envelope inside the safe waited where I had left it. I sat on the edge of the bed again and finally lifted it out. The paper was thick, cream-colored, the kind Robert preferred for important letters. My name was written in ink that had not faded. I traced the letters once before opening it. Inside was a folded document and a handwritten note. My heart did not race. It settled into a calm, deliberate rhythm. Downstairs I could hear Ashley moving furniture, the scrape of wood against hardwood floors. She was already rearranging the house in her mind. I unfolded the note first. Robert's handwriting was firm, unmistakable. I read the first line and felt something inside me sharpen into focus. He had anticipated more than I realized. He had prepared for more than I knew. I did not rush through the pages. I read every word slowly, absorbing the language, the dates, the signatures. By the time I finished, the sounds downstairs no longer unsettled me. They sounded distant, almost irrelevant. I refolded the documents and placed them back in the envelope, then returned it to the safe. I did not need to confront anyone yet. Not today. I stood and smoothed the quilt on the bed, adjusting Robert's pillow so it sat exactly as it always had. 5 days, Ashley had said. Next Wednesday. I glanced at the calendar on the wall. There was plenty of time between now and then. When I walked back downstairs, Daniel looked up again, searching my face for emotion he could measure. I gave him none. I will take care of my own arrangements, I said calmly. Ashley opened her mouth to respond, but I continued, there are things you do not understand. She frowned slightly, confusion flickering across her features. Daniel hesitated. What things, Mom? I met his eyes directly for the first time since the night before. The kind your father always handled, I answered. Then I turned and walked toward the hallway, leaving them with a silence that was no longer empty but deliberate. Upstairs, behind winter coats and locked steel, my name was written on more than an envelope. And for the first time since Robert's funeral, I was not merely grieving. I was preparing. Daniel left for work just after 9 that morning, his car pulling out of the driveway with a hesitation that did not go unnoticed. He paused at the end of Maple Ridge Drive as if considering whether to come back inside, then turned the corner and disappeared from view. Ashley remained in the living room with her laptop open on the coffee table, typing with deliberate focus. I could hear the faint clicking of keys as I moved quietly through the hallway. She was drafting something, no doubt, perhaps emails to a realtor or notes about staging furniture. The house felt less like a home and more like a project under renovation, and yet nothing had physically changed. The framed photographs were still in place. The hardwood floors still gleamed under the morning light. The only difference was the intention behind the air. I walked into Robert's study and closed the door softly behind me. The room smelled faintly of old books and cedar polish. His leather chair sat angled toward the window, the way he liked it when he reviewed documents in the afternoon sun. I sat down at his desk and opened the envelope again, laying the contents carefully across the polished surface. The handwritten note rested on top of several legal documents bearing signatures and dates from nearly a decade ago. I read the first paragraph once more, this time allowing each word to settle fully. Robert had not been careless. He had not assumed that love alone would keep everything steady after he was gone. He had anticipated shifts in loyalty, changes in circumstance. He had prepared safeguards. I reached for the phone on the desk and dialed the number printed at the bottom of one of the documents. It rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. Law Offices of Gregory Bennett. This is Margaret Collins, I said evenly. I would like to schedule an appointment regarding my late husband's trust. There was a brief pause, then the sound of keys being typed. Yes, Mrs. Collins. We have been expecting your call. Expecting. The word carried weight. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning would be ideal, I replied. I did not ask Daniel for permission. I did not inform Ashley of my plans. I replaced the receiver gently and gathered the papers back into the envelope. Downstairs, I heard Ashley's voice on speakerphone. Yes, we will need to move quickly, she was saying. It is a prime property. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, about 3,200 square feet. She spoke as though the house were already hers. I opened the study door and stepped into the hallway, my footsteps measured and unhurried. Ashley glanced up when I entered the living room. Everything all right? She asked, her tone light but guarded. Yes, I said. I have an appointment tomorrow morning. She tilted her head slightly. An appointment? With Robert's attorney. I watched her expression carefully. A flicker passed across her face, subtle but unmistakable. Is that necessary? She asked. Very, I answered. I did not elaborate. I walked toward the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Ashley returned to her laptop, but her typing slowed. The rest of the afternoon unfolded with careful stillness. I sorted through a drawer in the hallway, placing old warranties and expired coupons into a small stack. I folded laundry that no longer needed folding. I moved through the house not as someone preparing to leave but as someone taking inventory. Each object held history. Each room carried memory. Yet beneath the memories lay structure, paperwork, ownership. That evening Daniel returned home later than usual. He loosened his tie and stood in the doorway of the kitchen while I prepared a simple dinner of baked chicken and steamed green beans. Mom, he began cautiously, Ashley said you called Dad's lawyer. I placed the serving spoon down and looked at him directly. Yes. He shifted his weight. Why? I wiped my hands on a towel. Because your father did not build this life without planning for what comes after. Daniel frowned slightly. We are not trying to take advantage of you. I held his gaze, calm and steady. Then you have nothing to worry about. The words hung between us, not accusatory, not comforting. Just factual. Ashley entered the kitchen and stood beside him. We just want clarity, she said. So do I replied. Dinner passed in quiet conversation about work schedules and grocery lists, as though nothing had shifted. Yet the silence felt different now. It was no longer filled with confusion. It carried awareness. After washing the dishes, I walked back upstairs and stood for a moment at the bedroom window. The oak tree outside swayed gently in the evening breeze, its branches firm against the fading light. I thought about roots, about foundations laid long before anyone else claimed ownership. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, would sit across from a man who understood every signature Robert had placed on paper. Tomorrow, I would hear confirmation of what I had read in that envelope. And downstairs, in the living room they were already measuring for change, unaware that the ground beneath them was not as loose as they believed. I turned off the bedroom lamp and allowed the house to settle into darkness, not with fear, not with grief alone, but with a quiet certainty that nothing here was as simple as packing a suitcase and walking away. The next morning I dressed with the same care I once reserved for church on Sundays. A navy skirt that fell just below my knees, a pressed ivory blouse, the pearl necklace Robert gave me on our 25th anniversary. I brushed my silver hair back neatly and applied a light touch of lipstick. There is something steadying about routine, especially when the ground beneath you feels uncertain. Ashley watched me from the kitchen island as I picked up my handbag. "Big meeting?" she asked, attempting casual interest. "Yes," I replied. "Very." Daniel avoided my eyes as he buttered a slice of toast. He looked as though he wanted to say something reassuring, something that would soften what he had allowed to happen, but reassurance without action is only noise. I left the house at 9:30 and drove myself the 20 minutes into town. The streets were familiar. The hardware store where Robert bought nails by the pound. The bakery that still displayed apple pies in the front window. Life moved forward without pausing for personal upheaval. Gregory Bennett's office sat in a modest brick building with a brass plaque by the door. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and coffee. The receptionist greeted me by name, as though I had been expected all along. I sat in a leather chair and waited without tapping my foot, without fidgeting. When Mr. Bennett entered the conference room, he carried a folder thicker than the one in my handbag. He shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Collins," he said gently, "Robert made sure we would be prepared for this day." I met his gaze. "Prepared for which day?" I asked. He opened the folder and laid out several documents in precise order. The day when circumstances might shift. He did not need to explain further. He reviewed the structure of the family trust Robert had established nearly 10 years ago. The house on Maple Ridge Drive, the investment accounts, the small manufacturing business Robert and Daniel had run together. Every asset was listed with clarity. "You are the sole trustee," Mr. Bennett said calmly. Effective immediately upon Robert's passing. I did not allow my expression to change. "And Daniel?" I asked. "Daniel is a beneficiary," he replied. "He receives distributions only under the conditions outlined here." He turned a page and pointed to a paragraph. The language was clear, deliberate, and unmistakable. If I were pressured, displaced, or coerced into relinquishing residence or control of the property, all decision-making authority over the business and related accounts would transfer exclusively to me until my death. Daniel's access would be suspended. I let the silence stretch between us. "He anticipated conflict," I said quietly. "He anticipated possibility," Mr. Bennett corrected gently. Robert believed in planning. He handed me copies of the relevant pages, highlighting sections that required my signature to activate certain protections. "No one can list that house for sale without your written consent," he added. "And no one can access the primary business accounts without your authorization." I signed where required, my handwriting steady. There was no tremor in my fingers. When the meeting concluded, Mr. Bennett stood. "You are in a position of strength, Mrs. Collins," he said. "Use it wisely." Outside, the midday sun felt warmer than it had the day before. I drove home slowly, not because I was uncertain, but because I understood that once I walked through that front door, the balance in the house would begin to shift. Ashley's car was in the driveway when I arrived. She opened the door before I reached it. "How did it go?" she asked, too quickly. I stepped inside and placed my handbag on the entry table. "Productively," I answered. Daniel appeared from the living room, his expression tight with curiosity. "Mom?" he prompted. I removed my gloves and set them down carefully. "Your father believed in documentation," I said. "He believed in clarity." Ashley folded her arms. "And?" I looked at both of them, not with accusation, not with anger, but with the calm of someone who has read every page. "This house is not being listed next Wednesday," I said evenly. "No realtor will be taking photographs." Daniel blinked. "What are you talking about?" I walked into the living room and sat down in Robert's old armchair. The leather creaked softly beneath me. "I am the trustee," I explained. "Nothing moves without my consent." Ashley's jaw tightened. That is not what Daniel understood. I held her gaze. Then Daniel did not understand. The room fell quiet. Daniel stepped forward. "Mom, we were just trying to plan ahead." I nodded once. "And I am doing the same." There was no need to raise my voice. No need to recite legal language. The truth had weight on its own. Ashley opened her mouth again, but no words came out immediately. For the first time since Robert's funeral, uncertainty crossed her face. I folded my hands in my lap and let the silence work in my favor. They had believed grief would cloud my judgment. They had believed age would slow my response. Instead, I had spent the morning confirming exactly where I stood. "You asked me to pack my bags," I said quietly. "I will not be doing that." Daniel swallowed hard. The oak tree outside cast steady shadows across the living room floor. Nothing in the house had changed physically. The walls were the same. The furniture was the same. But the air had shifted. It no longer carried the assumption that I was temporary. It carried understanding. I did not threaten. I did not accuse. I simply existed in the authority that had always been mine. And for the first time since Ashley spoke those words at the dinner table, I saw clearly that the ground beneath Maple Ridge Drive was far more solid than they had imagined. The silence that followed my words did not explode into argument. It settled into the room like dust in late afternoon light, visible only when you looked closely. Daniel stood near the fireplace, his hands braced on the mantel as though he needed physical support. Ashley remained by the sofa, her posture rigid, calculating. I did not move from Robert's armchair. I had learned something important in Mr. Bennett's office that morning. Authority does not need volume. It needs certainty. "Mom," Daniel said finally, "we were not trying to force you." The word force lingered in the air, fragile and dangerous. I tilted my head slightly. "You gave me a week," I replied calmly. "You scheduled a realtor." Ashley exhaled sharply. "We assumed you would understand the practical side of this." Practical. The word had become her shield. "I do understand it," I said. "Better than you think." I rose from the chair and walked to the window, looking out at the oak tree swaying steadily in the breeze. "Your father built layers into everything," I continued. "Insurance. Contingencies. Protections." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Mom, I worked with him. I know the business." "You worked with him," I agreed. "You did not sign every document." That was when the shift became visible. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just visible. Ashley's eyes narrowed slightly. "What exactly are you implying?" she asked. I turned back toward them. "Nothing," I answered. "I am stating facts." I crossed the room slowly and picked up a thin folder I had placed on the coffee table earlier. I did not open it. I did not need to. "I am the trustee now," I said evenly. "Which means I review the accounts. I approve distributions. I authorize access." Daniel stared at me, confusion battling with realization. "Are you saying I cannot access the operating account?" he asked quietly. "I am saying," I replied, "that all access flows through me." Ashley took a step forward. "That is unnecessary. Daniel runs the company." "Daniel helps run the company," I corrected gently. "Ownership and management are not the same." The room fell quiet again. I could see Daniel replaying conversations. In his mind, trying to remember whether Robert had ever mentioned such details. He had not. Robert believed in preparation without panic. He believed that if certain documents never needed to be used, then peace would have prevailed. But peace had not prevailed. "We were just planning ahead," Daniel said again, softer this time. I nodded. "So am I." I walked toward the hallway and retrieved my handbag from the entry table. From it, I removed a single sheet of paper and placed it in Daniel's hands. "Read the highlighted section," I instructed calmly. He scanned the page, his brow furrowing. Ashley leaned over his shoulder. I watched as understanding spread slowly across their faces. It was not explosive. It was quiet. Measured. This says, Daniel began, hesitating, that if you are displaced or pressured to vacate the property, the business authority transfers fully to you. Yes, I confirmed. Ashley straightened abruptly. We did not pressure you, she insisted. I met her gaze steadily. You told me to pack my bags and never come back. The words hung in the air exactly as she had spoken them. This time, there was no denial. Only silence. Daniel lowered the paper. Mom, he said carefully, I did not realize it was structured like this. That is clear, I replied. I took the document back and returned it to my handbag. I do not want conflict, I added. I want respect. Ashley crossed her arms again, but her posture no longer held the same confidence. So what happens now? She asked. I walked back to Robert's armchair and sat down, folding my hands in my lap. Now, I said evenly, we proceed as a family, not as adversaries. Daniel swallowed. Meaning? Meaning this house remains my residence, I explained. Meaning the business continues under the structure your father established. Meaning no one schedules realtors without consulting me. The afternoon light shifted across the hardwood floor, stretching shadows toward the staircase. Nothing dramatic occurred. No raised voices. No slammed doors. Just clarity. Ashley looked toward Daniel as if searching for a counterargument. He offered none. For the first time since Robert's funeral, he seemed to recognize that the foundation beneath his assumptions had been incomplete. We should review everything together, Daniel said finally. I inclined my head once. We will, I answered. With Mr. Bennett present. That detail mattered. Transparency protects everyone. Ashley inhaled. Slowly, her earlier certainty dissolving into guarded calculation. I stood once more and adjusted the picture frame on the mantel, straightening a photograph of Robert and Daniel at a fishing dock years ago. Your father trusted you, I said quietly, not accusing, simply reminding. Daniel's expression softened. I know. I turned toward the kitchen. Dinner will be ready at 6, I added, as though the structure of daily life remained intact. Because in many ways, it did. Authority had not changed the walls. It had simply rebalanced the weight within them. As I moved through the house that evening, I did not feel victorious. I felt steady. The oak tree outside stood rooted as it always had, branches wide, trunk solid. They had mistaken silence for weakness. They had mistaken grief for confusion. What they were beginning to understand was that preparation outlasts impulse. And I was prepared. The following morning the house did not feel hostile. It felt cautious. Daniel left earlier than usual, dressed in a dark suit instead of his typical business casual, as though he were bracing for a formal review rather than an ordinary workday. Ashley moved more quietly through the kitchen, her confidence tempered by calculation. No one mentioned the realtor again. No one mentioned packing. The shift had taken place, subtle but undeniable. After breakfast I carried my coffee into Robert's study and opened the ledger he had kept for years. His handwriting filled page after page, neat columns of numbers documenting supplier payments, payroll cycles, quarterly taxes. I had never been excluded from these details. I had simply allowed him to handle them because we trusted each other's roles. Now the role had changed. I reached for my phone and dialed the business office. Collins Manufacturing, the receptionist answered. This is Margaret Collins, I said evenly. Please connect me to the accounting department. There was a pause, then a respectful tone. Of course, Mrs. Collins. When the accountant came on the line, I introduced myself as trustee and requested a summary of all active accounts, lines of credit, and outstanding obligations. My voice did not tremble. I did not apologize for the request. We can send the reports by this afternoon, he replied. That would be appropriate, I answered. After hanging up, I opened the laptop on Robert's desk and logged into the trustee portal Mr. Bennett had activated. Passwords were replaced. Access controls were updated. Each step felt deliberate, not punitive. Structure prevents misunderstanding. Around noon Ashley appeared in the doorway of the study. "Are you reorganizing everything?" she asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. I glanced up. "I am reviewing what belongs to me to oversee," I replied. She stepped inside, folding her arms loosely. "Daniel has managed the company for years." "With oversight," I said calmly. "Oversight has simply shifted." She studied me carefully, perhaps searching for anger she could confront. Finding none, she tried a different angle. "You do not trust us." I leaned back slightly in Robert's chair. "Trust and documentation are not opposites," I said. "They work together." She did not respond immediately. Instead she looked around the room, at the bookshelves, the framed certifications, the photographs of Robert shaking hands with suppliers. "This was his world," she said quietly. "It still is," I answered. "And he decided how it would continue." Ashley left without another word. By mid-afternoon the reports arrived by email. I printed them and spread them across the desk. Revenue projections. Expense summaries. A line of credit recently expanded without my knowledge. I traced the figures with steady focus. Nothing alarming. Nothing reckless. But assumptions had been made. I picked up the phone again and called Daniel. "Can you come home early today?" I asked. There was a pause. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "No," I replied. "Something needs clarity." He arrived before 5, tension evident in the way he set his briefcase down. Ashley followed him into the study this time without waiting to be invited. I gestured toward the papers on the desk. "Walk me through the new credit expansion," I said evenly. Daniel blinked. "It was strategic," he replied quickly. "We needed flexibility for a potential equipment upgrade." "Did your father approve that?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "We discussed it before he passed." "Was it documented?" I pressed, not accusing, simply asking. He glanced at Ashley, then back at me. "Not formally." I nodded once. "From this point forward, it will be." The room remained quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Ashley stepped closer to the desk. "Are you auditing him?" she asked sharply. I met her gaze without raising my voice. "I am fulfilling my responsibility." Daniel exhaled slowly. "What do you want?" he asked. "Transparency," I answered. "Monthly financial reviews. No changes to credit lines without written approval. No property discussions without my presence." The list was not long. It was structured. Daniel looked at the numbers again, then at me. "You are serious," he said softly. "Yes," I replied. The word did not carry anger. It carried permanence. Ashley shifted her weight, clearly unsettled. "You are changing everything," she said. "No," I corrected gently. "I am maintaining what was established." That distinction mattered. The foundation had not moved. The oversight had. Daniel straightened his shoulders slowly. "All right," he said at last. "We will do it your way." I held his gaze. "It is not my way," I said. "It is your father's structure." The conversation did not escalate. It settled. When they left the study, I remained seated for a moment, looking at Robert's handwriting in the ledger. He had not prepared these layers out of suspicion. He had built them out of foresight. Downstairs, I could hear Ashley speaking in a lowered voice, her earlier certainty replaced by caution. The house felt different now, not divided, but aware. I gathered the reports into a neat stack and closed the ledger gently. Outside, the oak tree stood firm against the fading light, roots deep beneath the soil. Authority had not made me harsh. It had made me precise. And precision, I realized, was far more unsettling than anger ever could be. The first sign that the balance had truly shifted did not come from raised voices or open arguments. It came from a phone call Daniel received 3 days later while we were finishing dinner. His cell phone vibrated against the dining table, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He glanced at the screen and answered quickly. "Hello?" His expression changed within seconds. "What do you mean it requires trustee authorization?" he asked, lowering his voice but not enough to hide the tension. I continued cutting my chicken into even pieces, listening without appearing to. "I understand the structure," Daniel insisted into the phone. "I am the managing partner." A pause. His jaw tightened. "Fine. I will follow up tomorrow." He ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table. Ashley leaned toward him. "What happened?" she whispered. Daniel exhaled slowly. "The bank flagged the equipment order," he said. "They said the expanded credit line cannot be accessed without written trustee approval." The word trustee hung in the air. Ashley's eyes flicked toward me, then away again. I set my fork down gently. "That is correct," I said evenly. Daniel looked at me, frustration and disbelief colliding in his expression. "You did not have to freeze it," he said. "I did not freeze anything," I replied calmly. "I activated the review protocol." Ashley pushed her plate aside. "This is embarrassing," she said under her breath. "For whom?" I asked softly. Silence settled again, thicker this time. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "The supplier was expecting confirmation today," he said. "Then we will confirm it properly," I answered. "With documentation." He looked at me as if seeing someone unfamiliar. "You are turning this into a legal exercise," he said. I held his gaze. It always was. After dinner, Daniel retreated to the study with a stack of files. Ashley followed, her voice low but urgent. I did not strain to hear their conversation. I did not need to. The tension in the house had shifted from assumption to uncertainty. Later that evening, Daniel knocked on my bedroom door. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded and motioned for him to sit in the chair near the window. The oak tree outside cast long shadows across the lawn under the porch light. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Mom, I feel like you are punishing me," he said quietly. I folded my hands in my lap. "For what?" I asked. He hesitated. "For what Ashley said." I considered his words carefully. "I am not punishing you," I replied. "I am preventing confusion." He looked down at the carpet. "It feels like you do not trust me." "Trust," I said slowly, "is strengthened by clarity, not weakened by it." He sighed. "The company needs agility. Quick decisions." "Then bring them to me quickly," I answered. "I will review them quickly." He lifted his eyes to mine. "And if you say no?" I did not look away. "Then there is a reason." The simplicity of the answer unsettled him more than resistance would have. Downstairs, I could hear Ashley moving dishes in the sink with sharper motions than usual. Daniel sat back in the chair, silent for a long moment. "You really are prepared for this," he said finally. "Your father was prepared," I corrected gently. "I am honoring that." He nodded slowly, absorbing the shift in hierarchy that had taken place without a single shout. The next morning, an email arrived from the supplier requesting confirmation on the equipment order. I forwarded it to Mr. Bennett and the accountant, requesting a joint review. By noon, we had a virtual meeting scheduled for the following afternoon. No one was being excluded. No one was being attacked. The structure simply required participation. Ashley approached me in the kitchen later that day, her expression composed but tight. "You could have handled this quietly," she said. I looked up from the cutting board where I was slicing apples for a pie. "Quietly does not mean informally," I replied. She crossed her arms. "Daniel feels undermined." "Daniel felt entitled," I said calmly. "There is a difference." Her eyes flashed briefly, then softened. "We were just trying to move forward," she said. I placed the knife down carefully. "Moving forward without understanding the foundation leads to collapse," I answered. She did not respond. For the first time since she told me to pack my bags, she seemed unsure of her footing. That afternoon, I walked through the house slowly, touching the back of the dining chairs, straightening a framed photograph, adjusting the curtains in the living room. Nothing had changed physically. And yet everything had shifted beneath the surface. Daniel was no longer operating under assumption. Ashley was no longer issuing directives. The oak tree outside stood steady against a gathering breeze, its roots deep, invisible but unshakable. Authority had not fractured the family. It had revealed its structure. And in that revelation, the imbalance that once favored impulse now leaned firmly toward order. The virtual meeting the next afternoon unfolded with a level of calm that would have seemed impossible only a week earlier. Daniel sat at the dining table with his laptop open, shoulders squared as though preparing for a formal presentation. Ashley positioned herself beside him, silent but watchful. I sat at the head of the table where Robert once presided over holiday meals, my folder neatly arranged in front of me. On the screen, Mr. Bennett appeared first, composed and steady, followed by the accountant and the supplier representative. No one raised their voice. No one accused. The numbers spoke for themselves. The equipment upgrade was viable, but the timing required adjustment. Cash flow projections showed a narrower margin than Daniel had anticipated. With trustee oversight, the accountant explained, the risk exposure decreases significantly. Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing the analysis. I watched him carefully. He was not reckless. He was ambitious. There is a difference, but ambition without structure can quietly erode stability. "We can proceed next quarter," I said evenly. After reviewing the second quarter revenue, the supplier agreed without hesitation. The meeting ended with clear action steps and documented approval conditions. When the screen went dark, the house felt still, almost contemplative. Daniel closed his laptop slowly. "I did not realize the margin was that tight," he admitted. I inclined my head. "That is why we review." Ashley shifted in her seat. "You could have told us before escalating it to a formal meeting," she said, her tone restrained but edged. I folded my hands on the table. "Structure is not escalation," I replied. "It is prevention." She held my gaze for a moment longer than usual, then looked away. Later that evening, I noticed something subtle. Daniel remained in the study long after dinner, not to argue, not to complain, but to review ledgers with renewed attention. Papers were spread across Robert's old desk in careful rows. When I stepped into the doorway, he did not hide them. "I should have double-checked the projections," he said quietly. "You are learning," I answered. He looked up at me, a flicker of humility in his expression that had not been present before. "You always knew more than I thought," he added. I did not smile. I did not gloat. "Your father discussed everything with me," I said simply. Partnership does not disappear because one partner passes. Downstairs, Ashley paced slowly through the living room, her phone in her hand but untouched. The confidence that once drove her quick decisions had been replaced by caution. She was not defeated. She was recalculating. The next morning, a letter arrived from the bank confirming updated trustee authorization on all major accounts. I placed it neatly in a file and left a copy on Daniel's desk without commentary. By afternoon, he came to find me in the garden trimming back rose bushes. "I understand now," he said quietly. I kept my focus on the shears, clipping a wilted bloom with precision. "Understand what?" I asked. "Why Dad structured it this way," he replied. I paused and looked at him fully. "And?" He swallowed. "And why you are not leaving." The breeze moved gently through the oak tree above us, leaves whispering against one another. "I never planned to," I said. He nodded slowly, absorbing not just the legal truth but the emotional one. Inside the house, Ashley watched from the kitchen window, her expression unreadable. The balance had shifted again, not toward hostility, but toward clarity. There were no more assumptions about my departure. No more quiet phone calls to realtors. Instead, there were scheduled reviews, documented decisions, shared accountability. That evening at dinner, Daniel asked for my input before outlining a new supplier proposal. Ashley listened without interruption. The dynamic at the table had changed, not dramatically, but fundamentally. I had not raised my voice. I had not issued threats. I had simply occupied the role that had always been written into the foundation of this house. As night settled over Maple Ridge Drive, the porch light cast a steady glow across the front lawn. The oak tree stood firm, its branches stretching confidently into the dark. Authority had not fractured our family. It had revealed where the roots truly lay. And beneath the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the hallway clock, there was something else now. Not tension. Not fear. Something steadier. Respect. The shift in the house did not announce itself with celebration. It revealed itself in smaller moments, the kind that used to pass unnoticed. 1 week after the bank confirmed trustee authorization, Daniel knocked on my bedroom door again, but this time there was no tension in his posture. "Mom," he said, standing in the hallway with a folder tucked under his arm, "can we review the supplier projections together?" The word together carried weight. I followed him downstairs to the dining table where he had laid out spreadsheets, printed summaries, and handwritten notes. Ashley sat across from him, not defensive, not impatient, simply listening. The air felt balanced. Daniel began explaining revenue cycles, pausing occasionally to ask, "Does this align with the trust structure?" I read through the pages carefully, asking questions not to challenge but to clarify. There were no raised voices. No rushed conclusions. When adjustments were needed, they were documented. When something required further analysis, it was scheduled. Authority had become collaboration. Later that afternoon, I walked through the living room and noticed that the "for sale" brochures Ashley had once gathered from the coffee table were gone. The space no longer felt like a transitional waiting room. It felt inhabited again. Daniel approached me in the kitchen while I was arranging fresh flowers in a vase. "I spoke to Mr. Bennett," he said quietly. "I told him we will follow the review process going forward." I nodded. "That is wise." He hesitated for a moment. "I am sorry," he added. I did not ask him to specify which part he regretted. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was reflective. Ashley joined us, her expression measured. "I misjudged the situation," she said carefully. "I thought acting quickly would protect everyone." I placed the vase at the center of the kitchen island and looked at her directly. "Protection without consultation feels like removal," I replied. She absorbed the sentence without protest. Outside, the oak tree moved gently in the late afternoon breeze, its shadow stretching across the yard exactly as it had for decades. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, Daniel waited for me to begin before serving himself. It was a small gesture, but it carried acknowledgement. Conversation shifted from control to planning. We discussed long-term strategy for the business, potential expansion next fiscal year, and the importance of maintaining reserves. There was no mention of packing. No mention of relocation. Only structure. After dinner, Daniel remained at the table while Ashley cleared the dishes. "Dad always said you were the steady one," he said softly. I folded my napkin neatly beside my plate. "Your father believed in balance," I answered. He understood that stability does not come from impulse. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying the house as though seeing it clearly for the first time. "I almost let that slip," he admitted. I shook my head slightly. "You almost misunderstood it," I corrected. Upstairs, I opened Robert's study one more time and ran my hand across the smooth surface of his desk. The ledger lay closed, no longer a symbol of hidden authority but a record of shared responsibility. I did not feel triumphant. I felt aligned. The trust documents were not weapons. They were guardrails. And now everyone in the house understood their purpose. The following week, Daniel invited me to attend a meeting at the business office. Not as an obstacle. As trustee. As partner. When we drove there together, he spoke about quarterly goals, asking for my perspective before forming conclusions. The shift was complete, not because I had forced it, but because clarity had replaced assumption. That evening, as the sun set over Maple Ridge Drive, casting warm light across the front porch, I stood by the window and watched the oak tree stand firm against the fading sky. It had weathered storms long before this one and would stand long after. The house remained mine, not by confrontation, but by foundation. Grief had not made me weak. Age had not made me invisible. And respect, once restored, had rooted itself deeper than any single argument ever could.